Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Sureshnie and welcome to another edition of Study Sesh, proudly brought to you by Boston Broadcasts. Every week, I get to sit down with one of your lecturers or an expert to unpack different topics and different modules. Today is no different, but I am super chuffed because this one comes really, really close to home. I used to be a journalism student, and one of the most important things when I studied journalism and just being in the media world is note taking. I know, you go to a lecture and all I was doing was scribbling down things, but what I realized, I was actually picking up really effective methods to retain the information that I was gaining. And then that kind of helped when I worked in media and I attended press conferences, and suddenly you as a journalist, you're on the road, you've got to get all these notes done. Proven, tracked. The track record for note-taking is just impressive, and I'm so excited to have Dr. Laura Fisher back in studio with us, and she's an expert in educational psychology, and this is her forte. Today's topic is proven note-taking strategies for better retention, because I really believe you can retain all this knowledge if you are effective at taking great notes. Dr. Laura, thank you once again for being with us in studio. Let's unpack the first thing. Can you start by just telling us or explaining to us the benefits of effective note-taking?
Yeah, so I, like you, am very passionate about this topic because I believe that it really has something to be said in it. Even in this digital day and age where we like to type away on our computers and we think that the same sorts of things are happening as what is happening when we write notes, actually the track record, as you said, on note-taking is really, really amazing. And the research to this day finds that students who take handwritten notes perform better on all kind of conceptual questions compared to students who have taken notes even on their laptops.
Wow.
And this is because the handwriting actually forces students to process information more deeply, and it leads to better retention. And I even questioned this research. I thought, no, man, surely our brains have evolved beyond needing to actually still handwrite.
Yeah.
And surely we can just type and we retain the knowledge. And I do think for some people it is like that. But for the majority of people, what is still demonstrated over and over again in the research and in recent studies published in the Psychological Science Journal, handwritten note-taking still leads to longer term retention of knowledge compared to typing notes on a laptop. So there's definitely something in our hands that links to our brains, which I'm going to go on to explain, that determines that handwriting and note-taking effectively with your handwriting promotes a more active cognitive engagement with the material, which, as we've said, leads to better learning and better retention over time.
Oh, I absolutely believe that there's a massive connection. And this has been like the way my parents have taught me from the time we were in school, taking notes all the way to high school. And then obviously when we all were in tertiary level, and my mom and dad would say, just take the notes down, just keep writing it down, come home and reread them. But you just mentioned something now about the brain, and I'm very curious. What is happening in the brain? Like, that sounds so interesting when you actually start taking down these notes. What happens?
Yeah, it's really quite amazing the way the brain works because obviously you've got neural pathways in the brain which are activated by certain muscular movements. So, for example, if you're feeling really down and you fake smile for 8 seconds, you'll actually make yourself feel happier because your muscles have told your brain that you're happy. So it's a similar kind of thing that happens with handwriting, is that what is happening is that the brain is actively aware that you're trying to retain information. And the way the brain does that is we code information. So we can imagine like an old school filing cabinet with the filing dividers A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we would put our notes in in really the old days. I don't even know if some of the students will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But an old-fashioned filing cabinet. Google a picture; it's really interesting.
You open it up and you pop these things
So
in.
our brains kind of act like this filing cabinet. And what we do is the first time we hear information, we open up a new section of our filing cabinet and we put in that information. And then the next time we hear about it, we take that information and we recognize that it connects with a specific kind of information that we've already encoded once, and it then assimilates that information into that part of the filing cabinet in the brain. So the brain is basically deciding all the time how material fits into your filing cabinet system in ever increasing complex ways. So it's neurologically meaningful to take notes because it allows for easier retrieval and recall later on. And the more your brain builds these connections between the notes that you're taking and the information you're learning, the more consolidated the memory is of that material. So even according to research done really recently, the physical act of writing activates a sensory motor system that creates strong connections between written words and their underlying concepts and how they fit into the filing cabinet of our brain, either as new information that requires a new file, or as information that we've already encountered before, but we're now going to assimilate into what we already knew about it. Anyway, all that to say, research continues to support the idea that the process of handwritten notes is very powerful for enhancing learning and overall comprehension and retention of material.
Oh, this is absolutely fascinating. The whole time I'm downloading all of your information, and all I want to do is write down everything that you've just said. Because, like, this is it. I surround myself with books and books, and all I'm always doing is writing notes. And I really believe that, like, I am one of those people that can tell you that it works. It really, really does. Dr. Fisher, this is just so much to unpack, but it's absolutely fascinating, and my brain is just so excited. But if we think about all these things you've spoken about in theory, how does one put it into practice? What are some of the popular note-taking methods that students at Boston can use to enhance their learning?
I think that in my experience with students and also even with my own children, what you need to do is you need to find what works for you.
Yeah.
So some people like to have very systematic styles of note taking, and others like more visual and creative styles of note taking. So I'm going to just clump it into those two different styles to start with. So if you are one of those people who likes quite a systematic style of note taking, you'd be interested to understand the Cornell method of note taking. So the Cornell method of note taking is really interesting because what you do is you just divide your page into a column, into a cue column, and then a note taking column. So in the cue column, you're going to be looking at what are my main ideas that I want to cover, what are the key words or cues, and what are the questions or study prompts that I need to know in order to remember this piece of information. And then in the note-taking column, you're going to expand on those main ideas. You're going to look at essential details. You're going to look at definitions. You're going to look at formulas or quotes or key concepts and terms. You're going to maybe give examples, diagrams, pictures, or if you're studying something like historical facts, you would kind of put your historical dates down. So this is quite a systematic way of note taking. So you're going to really, and then you probably would introduce some colors to, head your main headings, and then you would like look at the key words, and those key words would trigger things that you need to remember about the main idea. And then you can even ask yourself questions that you think that they might ask you, because generally your educators really want to help you to succeed. They're not out to trick you. So sometimes your lecturers will say, please be aware that this might come up in something that you're going to have to do shortly. Then you take your big red highlighter and you circle it. So the Cornell method of note-taking is a really interesting method of note-taking, and I think it's one that has been used to really help very almost like neurotypical learners. When I say that, the brain works in a very neurotypical way. It can systematize information. It's logical, it's coherent, and it doesn't need to have a lot of complexity. You're able to kind of glance at your page and you will know your information. You'll be able to quickly retrieve it to answer a question in an exam. So that's the kind of first, like, more systematized way of note taking. Then the second is what we call mind mapping. I'm sure you all know it. So it's a more visual technique that involves creating a diagram to visually organize and represent the information that you want to retain. So you start with like a central idea or a central topic, and then you begin by identifying main concepts that strand out from that central idea or topic. And then those main strands may even have sub-strands on them with additional details. So subtopics with more details. So, if you're learning about a psychological concept like empathy, what does empathy look like? How do we do empathy? How do we sound like we're being empathic? How can we gain empathy? How can we, what happens if we don't demonstrate empathy? How do we think and feel when we're being empathic? And then all of those kind of main ideas would have sub branches that would enable us to really retain the information that we're trying to get. And what is very interesting is that in a very, very recent study done by Johns Hopkins University, it showed that when students study utilizing mind mapping, grades improve by at least 12%, if not more. Absolutely. And that increase is attributed to how mind mapping helps students to organize ideas and understand concepts better. And you'll remember from a previous study session where we said what kind of different learning styles are there, that you'll either resonate with like a more systematic, coherent, logical approach, or I like the more creative, colorful approach to learning, and mind mapping's going to be a really good tool for you to use.
Dr. Laura, you just mentioned something that I loved, which is mind mapping. And I know that everybody has different techniques in what they love and what actually works for them, what resonates. But I wanted to find out from you, does the research provide other evidence-based techniques for better memory retention of information? And could you explain some of these to us?
Yeah, so the research does indicate that there are other kind of ways to learn outside of just kind of the Cornell note-taking method, which is essentially like an outlining method, which is very systematic, and the mind mapping method, which we'll all know what those two are. There are three others, which I find quite fascinating and that actually really work for me. The first is something called mnemonic devices. It's mnemonic. Okay, there's a whole debate about how that's said.
Yes.
I say mnemonic, so we're going to go with that, okay?
Yes.
So mnemonic devices involve creating associations or images to help remember information. But I'm not going to give too much away on this one because it's such an incredible one that we're actually going to spend the entire of our next study session together looking at mnemonic devices. So then that leaves two others, which is what we call spaced repetition. So spaced repetition involves reviewing material over spaced intervals to enhance long-term retention. So a way that you can think of this is actually when you're studying to do your learner's license. There's a spaced repetition that you will do when you get in the car and drive. You're not going to be driving solidly for like 10 hours or you're not going to be driving solidly for any significant amount of time, but that spaced repetition learning actually really helps us to be able to do things really well. So when we want to retrieve information that we need that's practical and that really we need to work with, spaced repetition is a brilliant way of learning. And then obviously over time, it just enhances your long-term memory retention. So there are different ways to do this. So I've given you the example of the driver's license, but if we're thinking about like in the classroom, say you're preparing for a psychology exam and you need to memorize key concepts and terms, you can create like flashcards for the terms and the concepts. And you use spaced repetition, and you can use apps for this now, like Anki or Quizlet, and they'll pop up, and these will all of a sudden ask you a whole lot of questions, and you answer the questions, and then the app will close and will only come on again in 2 hours when you set it to come on again. So that spaced repetition is really good because you can review your flashcards daily or hourly. Some of you may know an app called Duolingo. That's how Duolingo has become so incredibly popular and works so incredibly well, is because of the incentivization around spaced repetition. And then finally, obviously, we've got the idea that we need to not only do spaced repetition, but we also need to do retrieval practice. So the retrieval practice is quite similar, but it's actually about really recalling the information from memory, which has been shown to improve long-term retention compared to simply rereading or highlighting information, or even doing Cornell note-taking or mind mapping. So it was found in a study a couple of years back that to improve the long-term retention of very dense information, participants who engaged in retrieval practices were able to remember information much better than those who simply reread and reread and reread and reread. So these are both disciplines. They're quite similar to each other. The spaced repetition is that you are asking yourself the same questions and you know you've got the answer on the back of your flashcard. And then the retrieval practice is similar, except that you aren't just reading the same thing over and over again. You might be looking at the same concept, but from different angles. So creating flashcards for study course material and using these apps which enable retrieval practice really can enhance memory and learning quite substantially.
Dr. Laura, I love those options. I think they are great options for students to choose from. But now let's focus on tips for actually organizing and reviewing the notes for maximum retention. What strategies can students at Boston use to ensure that their notes are well organized and easy to review?
Yeah, so I think that the answer lies in the question. Organize your notes and make them easy to read.
Yes. Please make them easy to read. 'Cause sometimes I've made notes and I was like, what was I writing here? And why am I looking like doctor's writing? And it takes me longer to unpack. Is that an F or is it an L? But yeah, like I said, for me, like you mentioned, I love things like highlighters. I like being creative, and sometimes it helps me retain what I've had. But what would you say is easy for well organized notes? What would you recommend?
Of really organizing your notes. I think that in this day and age, probably again to leverage technology that's available to you for note taking. So yes, you keep your notes in files, in folders, but you can also leverage technology to enhance note taking and the retention of information. And the way you can do that is, and I love to do this, but I might be a bit of a nerd, is that actually you can write your notes out and then you can actually photograph them and you can file them
Okay.
into different files so that you can retrieve the information, actually mimicking what the brain does when it is going to retrieve that piece of information. So there's OneNote, there's Notion, there's Evernote. All of these apps allow you to upload into them your handwritten notes and making it easy to review your study notes on the go. You can also then, go and find some images or links or audio recordings that really enhance the overall learning experience. So I think that staying organized is obviously really important, but what is even more important is to leverage the technology world that we live in and, just again, as I said the other day, please just find a strategy that works for you and stick with it.
Yeah.
Don't try 25 strategies. Select one. If it's Evernote, use Evernote. If it's OneNote, use OneNote. Because then what you begin to do is you begin to actually replicate the filing system that's going on in your brain in real time. And that in and of itself is very powerful in building long-term memory retention.
So Dr. Fisher has been hosting these sessions with us on hashtag Study Sesh at Boston Media Broadcast. And I am going to encourage you to go visit our previous episodes because I think you're going to find the lessons that we spoke about, including effective time management, are actually going to come into play when you are talking about taking effective notes and how it actually assists you in the long run. Dr. Fisher, how do we wrap up? What tips practically that can we give our students for today?
Okay, so I thought actually had quite a long think about this question.
Yeah.
Because I thought, what do I really want the students to know at the end of this about how to enhance their memory, how to retain information, how to be able to retrieve information, because we really want to see our students succeed. So 6 things come to mind. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly.
Okay.
The first is stay engaged and actively listen during your lectures or study sessions. Actively take notes. I've given you the reasons for that. And ask questions until you understand the material. Don't think I've asked too many questions. You just carry on asking until you understand. Focus on capturing key points and details and use either your Cornwall note-taking methodology or your mind mapping note-taking methodology so that you're able to then go back to that information and actually remember what you spoke about during that particular lecture or during that particular peer session that you had. Review and organize your notes. And I've given you some technology advice around that, which I think really, really helps. It also really makes you feel extremely organized when you open up your Evernote and, you've got your handwritten notes there and you've added in some diagrams. and you've got your dates, it's all dated and it looks really good. And review these notes regularly. And it comes back actually to time management, because you might think, well, this is a waste of time, like I've done it already.
Yeah.
It's not wasting time. It's actually a good investment of your time to make sure that your notes are organized in a way that makes sense to you. And then practice methods that work for you. So we spoke about Cornwall method, mind mapping. We spoke about mnemonics very briefly. We spoke about spaced repetition. We spoke about retrieval practices. Find the one that works best for you, and then just find and utilize technology that will help you to incorporate your digital note taking into a filing system that almost replicates that beautiful, incredible brain that you have, that can actually hold all of this information in it. So by implementing these strategies and tips, I am of the opinion that students can develop effective note-taking habits, which will enhance their retention of information. And ultimately, it improves your academic performance. And when you see your academic performance improving, it just sort of adds fuel to the fire, in that you want it to continue to improve. So you carry on being more organized, you carry on engaging in these practices more and more. And yeah, I just want to encourage you, find what works for you and stick with it, and take notes.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And I can tell you it becomes a life best practice, because as a former student, I've kept the exact same techniques. And to this day, I still use them. Obviously, I'm enhanced with new apps and new ways of doing things with technology, but it's still the same foundation that has helped me through. You could do the same by following us on YouTube, Boston Broadcast. Go search for us. We're all over. We're on all social media. Please follow us, because I think there's some valuable sessions that you could pick up on, especially with topics that Dr. Laura Fisher has previously discussed. Please download them, please watch them at your pace, and then fit them all together, because these are the insights that you need to have a successful tertiary education. And I'm so excited that we catch up more often with Dr. Laura Fisher. Thank you so much, everybody, for being part of our hashtag Study Sesh, proudly brought to you by Boston Broadcasts.